From filmmaker Sean S. Cunningham comes the 1980 film that gave birth to a behemoth of a franchise, painting the 80s with a brush dipped in terror, a splash of the supernatural, and an iconic figure who would later become synonymous with the fear that grips us in our darkest nightmares. I'm talking about the 1980 seminal slasher film, Friday the 13th. Now, let me preface this by saying that I truly, genuinely appreciate this film for what it is, and I admire the foundations it laid down for the slasher genre. This film was the beginning, the root system from which a sprawling horror franchise would grow, branching out into a staggering 11 additional films. But before we get lost in the vastness of the Friday the 13th franchise as a whole, let us focus on the trunk, the origin, the first film in this iconic saga. Directed by Sean S. Cunningham, this movie came at a time when the slasher genre was still finding its footing, grappling with formulas that work, and experimenting with what could make audiences' skin crawl. The premise is simple but effective. A group of young and unsuspecting counselors gathering to reopen an ill-fated summer camp, blissfully unaware of the doom that awaits them as they become targets of an unseen assailant, hell-bent on vengeance. It leverages the universal fear of being pursued, of being caught unaware, and the setting, the isolated, eerie woods of Camp Crystal Lake, amplifies this dread to a fever pitch.
Ta-da!
Are you crazy?
Want to see my trick shot? It's even better.
I don't believe you!
In the foundational stages of Friday the 13th, casting directors Julie Hughes and Barry Moss were engaged to assemble a group of young and likable actors, not necessarily highly experienced, to play the roles of camp counselors. This endeavor led to the selection of actors including Kevin Bacon, Laurie Bartram, and Peter Brower, who all had backgrounds in soap operas. While initially seeking a high-profile actress to portray Alice Hardy, the production ultimately turned to Adriana King, citing her natural demeanor in the audition. Robbie Morgan was unexpectedly cast as Annie, landing the role during a visit to the Hughes and Moss offices. A distinctive character was created with the addition of Walt Gorney, playing Crazy Ralph, aimed at both foreshadowing the tragic events and presenting a potential suspect.
I'm a messenger of God. You're doomed if you stay here. This place is cursed. Cursed.
The script cultivated a profound backstory for the antagonist, Pamela Voorhees, portrayed by Betsy Palmer, who navigated the character's descent into psychosis, driven by the tragic loss of her son due to the perceived immoral acts by the camp counselors.
Steve should never have opened this place again. There's been too much trouble here. Did you know that a young boy drowned the year before those two others were killed? The counselors weren't paying any attention. They were making love while that young boy drowned.
Production unfolded around Hardwick, Blairstown, and Hope Townships in Warren County, New Jersey, with the pivotal camp scenes being shot at Camp Nobibosco, a functioning Boy Scout camp. The filming employed frequent point-of-view shots to provide the audience with the villain's perspective, enhancing the psychological thriller element. Special effects maestro Tom Savini, recognized for his work on Dawn of the Dead, crafted seminal horror moments, including the intense face axe wound and the climactic decapitation scene. Harry Manfredini formulated a score that would capture the audience's suspense, whether the killer was actually on screen or not, creating an almost never-ending sense of dread. Drawing inspiration from Jaws, a unique sound motif was developed to signify the unseen menace. The iconic sound, construed from the words kill and mommy, became a defining feature of the film, echoing the psychotic drive of the killer and enhancing the dread as it reverberated in the moments of heightened tension, crafting an atmosphere that has cemented its place in the horror genre's history. Now, while I commend the setting, the grim atmosphere, and the phenomenal makeup effects crafted brilliantly by Tom Savini, I must say, it is in the following sequels where the franchise really finds its true identity, morphing and refining the raw, frenetic energy found in the original film. You see, Friday the 13th was almost like an experiment, a prototype of what was to come, teetering on the edges of great cinematic horror, but not quite there yet. It certainly does not shy away from blood and gore, offering shocking, unapologetic violence that shakes the viewer to their core, but it doesn't yet have the signature stamp of the hockey-masked killer, Jason Voorhees, who would only truly step into the limelight in the subsequent entries, bringing with him an even more terrifying and macabre vision. The first movie takes its time to build tension, leaning heavily on a mystery whodunit kind of vibe, which works to some extent, masterfully executing its suspense through a first-person's perspective of the killer, creating a close and personal confrontation with terror itself. However, when we compare this with the later entries, it arguably lacks the over-the-top, theatrical, almost caricatured violence that somehow becomes a disturbing yet captivating trademark of the series. In the original Friday the 13th, we were granted a glimpse into the abyss of human depravity, but it is in the sequels where we fully plunge into this abyss with narratives that are not afraid to traverse the realms of the absurd, the surreal, and even the supernatural. We get more fleshed out lore surrounding Jason, the vengeful killer with an unquenchable thirst for blood, an entity that goes beyond a mere mortal, becoming a symbolic representation of fear itself.
You let him drown. You never paid any attention. Look what you did to him. Look what you did to him.
But with that said, however, regarding the rest of the franchise, one cannot ignore the powerhouse performance by Betsy Palmer in the first film, who played Pamela Voorhees, portraying a twisted yet tragically driven character with a depth that is honestly quite astonishing for a horror film of this era. She brought to life a character that could have easily been a one-dimensional antagonist, but instead offered a glimpse into a mind corroded by loss and vengeance. But even then, it is hard not to feel that the real meat of the Friday the 13th franchise, the bizarre yet captivating escalation into the lore of Jason Voorhees, truly kicks off in the sequels, spinning a web of terrifying tales that takes us through the haunted woods of Crystal Lake, right into the heart of New York City, and even to the far reaches of space in the eccentric yet wildly entertaining Jason X. As much as I respect the original Friday the 13th for its craftsmanship in building suspense and setting a trend that would revolutionize horror cinema, I can't help but feel that it serves more as a prelude, an appetizer before the rich, varied, and often crazy banquet that the series would later serve its audience. It's akin to a pilot episode that sets the stage, introducing us to a world fraught with danger and fear, yet it's in the sprawling narrative of its offspring where we find the series stretching its limbs, daring to be bolder, scarier, and yes, even a bit crazier. So here's to Friday the 13th, the vanguard of genre-defining series, a film that holds a special place in my heart, yet stands as a humble beginning, a mere prologue to a grand tale of horror that spans decades, offering a rich tapestry of fear, suspense, and sheer brutal force that would be further honed to perfection in its sequels. It is the genesis, a cornerstone that holds the weight of a franchise that would dive deeper, reaching new heights and new lows, expanding on a narrative that, for me, finds its true home and grandeur in the wild, sometimes absurd, yet captivating adventures that would follow. With that said, Sean S. Cunningham's Friday the 13th is revoltingly rewatchable. From filmmaker Steve Miner comes the mighty 1981 sequel to the original Friday the 13th, a film that not only sees an all-new group of teens and young adults meeting their grisly ends at the hands of a merciless killer, but one that also sees Jason Voorhees himself picking up the mantle after the death of his crazed mother. Let's take a look at Friday the 13th, Part 2. Friday the 13th Part 2 had a problem right from the outset, the fact that it had to follow in the gigantic footsteps of its predecessor, a film that had not just churned the soil of the horror landscape, but had sowed the seeds of a new kind of dread, a visceral fear anchored in ruthless realism. It was, admittedly, a gargantuan task for Part 2 to carry this torch forward, to shoulder the burden of a newfound legacy. But Steve Miner, working with a screenplay by Ron Kurz, took the helm, luring audiences into the familiar yet chilling waters of Camp Crystal Lake once more. After the success of the original Friday the 13th in 1980, Paramount Pictures, spurred by Frank Mancuso Sr., quickly began working on a sequel, envisioning it as a potential series of annual scary movies without direct continuity. Despite initial hesitations about retaining the character of Jason Voorhees, Pamela's son, who had a minor role in the first movie, it was decided he would now be the central villain in the follow-up. Adriana King reduced her role due to a stalking incident and a salary dispute, while Amy Steele won the main role of Ginny, bringing a deep and wary personality to the character. The filming of the film took place in New Preston and Kent, Connecticut, from October to November of 1980, with a sequence of changes in the special effects team, eventually landing on Carl Fullerton, who devised Jason's adult look, although this was later altered. Incidents including onset injuries punctuated the filming process, characterized by technical issues and genuine fear during tense scenes. Despite facing censorship hurdles with the MPAA, forcing a cut of 48 seconds to avoid an X rating, the film navigated through post-production, leaving out a considerable amount of shot material, including an alternate ending. Steve Miner, who strongly believed in the project, directed the first two sequels, maintaining continuity and grappling with the challenges including strict censorship rules and on-set accidents. The journey to bring Friday the 13th Part 2 to screens was marked by a dedicated cast and crew, adapting and persisting through multifaceted hurdles.
Half a mile.
Oh my God! They're towing us!
Oh shit, Ted, I'll call you back.
Hey!
Hey! Hey!
Stop! Hey!
This is my truck! This is my truck! Asshole! This is my truck!
Harry Manfredini, the iconic composer behind the chilling score of the original film, returned to lend his formidable talents to the sequel. With this continuation, Manfredini further cemented the haunting auditory landscape of the Friday the 13th series, employing his signature synthesis of sharp, jarring strings and slow, menacing rhythms to craft a score that perfectly encapsulates the tension and the dread that the franchise is known for. By returning for the sequel, he ensured a consistency in the series' atmospheric tension, helping to build a cohesive and terrifying world that would captivate audiences and set the stage for the numerous sequels to follow.
Legend has it that Jason saw his mother beheaded that night, and that he took his revenge. A revenge that he'll continue to seek if anyone ever enters his wilderness again. And by now, I guess you all know, we're the first to return here.
Now, as somebody who leans slightly, just slightly, towards holding Part 2 in a higher regard than the first film, I must confess that this sentiment sprouts from the embryonic emergence of Jason Voorhees, a figure we see blossom into the embodiment of vengeance, a raw force of nature in the later installments. The unforgiving, unrestrained, yet somewhat innocent Jason Voorhees comes to life here, with a raw energy that is both terrifying and slightly pitiful, a tragically misunderstood behemoth with the simplest of desires, to avenge his beloved mother.
Jason, Mother is talking to you!
Jason, Mother is talking to you.
The narrative of Friday the 13th Part 2 naturally begins with a fresh batch of unsuspecting camp counselors who unknowingly venture into the territory of Jason Voorhees, specifically at a camp counselor training camp nestled not too far down shore from the haunted space of Camp Crystal Lake itself, still echoing with the bloody sins of its past. There is a palpable sense of impending doom right from the outset, a tragedy waiting to unravel as we, the all-knowing viewers, see them wander, blissfully unaware, into the jaws of death itself, knowing full well that their ends are going to be bloody, painful, and extremely visceral. Yet, the film provides a space for these characters to breathe, to exist as more than mere lambs to the slaughter. They laugh, they love, they dream, a touch that offers a fleeting glimpse of humanity, a touch that, dare I say, elevates Part 2 slightly above its predecessor. But what enchants us, what pulls us into the captivating embrace of Part 2, is the unfaltering adherence to the true spirit of a slasher film. The visceral, heart-stopping moments of pure dread, the ingenious array of its death scenes, each more harrowing than the last, lend a grotesque beauty, a mesmerizing dance of death, orchestrated with an almost operatic grandeur. This is slasher cinema in its purest form, untouched, unadulterated by the expectations of a demanding audience, nurtured on a steady diet of horror.
What if there is a Jason?
Oh, bullshit, Jenny.
No, what if there is some kind of boy or beast running around Camp Crystal Lake? I mean, let's try to think beyond the legend, put it in real terms. I mean, what would it be like today? Some kind of out-of-control psychopath? A frightened retard? A child trapped in a man's body?
There is an innocent cruelty, a naive savagery in Jason's methodology here, a rawness that offers a fascinating insight into the mind of a killer, untouched by the ravages of time and the escalation of his own legend. Here, in the verdant grounds of Camp Crystal Lake, Jason is a pure force of nature, elemental and unfettered by the complexities that would later entwine around his character, making him a legend, yes, but perhaps a legend too far removed from the young boy who once drowned in the unforgiving waters of that current. The depth and the complexity of the iconic final chapter, or the aggressive brutality of Part 6 or 7. Yet, in its unrefined purity, it stands as a monument to the slasher genre, a testament to a time when fear was young, when Jason Voorhees was still being fleshed out, and when the franchise was still years away from diving into the realms of the supernatural. In conclusion, Friday the 13th Part 2 beckons you with open arms, inviting you to embrace the embryonic stages of a legend in the making, a chapter that, while not the zenith of the series, holds within its frames the essence of raw, unyielding terror, a slasher film that carves its unique niche in the annals of horror cinema. Let us revere it, let us appreciate it, as the powerful entity it is, standing tall, albeit slightly overshadowed by the giants that followed, yet undeniably potent, an entity with a heartbeat of its own, pulsating with a life force, a chapter indispensable in the grand narrative that is the saga of Jason Voorhees. With that said, Friday the 13th Part 2 is a scary good time. From filmmaker Steve Miner comes the infamous third installment in the Friday the 13th franchise, showcasing a slew of hilariously distracting 3D effects, an absolutely bizarre cast of characters, and the on-screen debut of Jason Voorhees' most iconic look. Let's take a look at Friday the 13th Part 3 in 3D. In Friday the 13th Part 3, the chilling narratives on Friday the 13th Part 3, there were considerable shifts in script and casting. Initially, the script portrayed Jenny, from the previous sequel, being confined to a psychiatric hospital where Jason Voorhees hunts her down, a plotline that eventually changed significantly due to Steele's refusal of the role owing to other commitments. Screenwriter Ron Kurtz rejected the offer to draft the screenplay, leading to the hiring of Martin Kitrosser and Carol Watson to undertake the task. Their draft was further modified by Petru Popescu to enhance its menacing aspect. An iconic element introduced in Part 3 was Jason's mask, which replaced the bag he wore over his head in Part 2, establishing a trademark look that became instantly recognizable globally. The cast featured Dana Kimmel as Chris Higgins, Paul Kratka as Rick, Tracy Savage as Debbie, Larry Zerner as Shelley, Catherine Parks as Vera, and influenced performance directions that prioritized 3D effects over acting nuances. The filming yes, I am referring to the birth of what we've come to know as classic Jason Voorhees. In this chapter, we witness the assembly of that iconic attire, a dark green shirt paired with gray, or shall we say beige, pants that seems to blend seamlessly with the malevolent surroundings of Camp Crystal Lake. But the crown jewel of this attire remains the hockey mask, an item so simple, yet it heralds the transformation of Jason into an icon, a figure whose very appearance sends shivers down our spine. This attire not just outfits Jason, it crafts the silhouette of a horror legend, engraving the terrifying image into the annals of horror film history. This aesthetic choice resonates profoundly, shaping a visual language that speaks of unrestrained terror, a relentless force personified as classic Jason Voorhees. Then that of Part 2. As I ponder upon the holistic experience of Friday the 13th Part 3 in 3D, the film beckons to the horror aficionado in me, urging me to appreciate the birth of classic Jason, an iconic version of the franchise's masked madman who would transcend this film to become synonymous with the horror genre itself. With that said, Friday the 13th Part 3 in 3D is satisfyingly spooky. From filmmaker Joseph Zito comes the fourth installment of the iconic slasher series that forever altered the landscape of horror cinema. Proclaiming itself as the concluding tale of the relentless killer Jason Voorhees, audiences were both eager and apprehensive. Let's take a look at Friday the 13th, the final chapter, to see if it truly delivers a fitting end to the notorious Camp Crystal Lake saga. Friday the 13th, the final chapter, is one of those quintessential slasher movies that I've been watching for as long as I can remember. I can recall being a bit confused by seeing the VHS tapes for both the final chapter and the final Friday on Videoland shelves, pondering which final movie was the actual final movie, even though I had seen Jason Goes to Hell in theaters and should have been aware of their order. But confusion aside, the final chapter has been an absolute staple in my life for decades and decades, and stands as what I believe to be the best non-supernatural Friday the 13th movie of the franchise, and certainly showcases the best version of Jason Voorhees, at least the best version of Jason Voorhees pre-zombification. A serene lakeside retreat descends into chaos with the unexpected resurgence of the infamous killer Jason Voorhees. Previously believed to be dead after the events of the third installment, Jason Voorhees swiftly escapes the county morgue, leaving a trail of devastation in his wake. Drawn back to the vicinity of Camp Crystal Lake, Jason discovers two homesteads on the way back to his original stomping grounds, one housing the Jarvis family, and the other hosting a group of teenagers seeking a fun-filled lakeside vacation. as the terror unfolds on the shores of Crystal Lake once again, not too far from Higgins Haven, the campground from Part 2, and Camp Crystal Lake itself. The seemingly never-ending nightmare of Jason's reign reaches its peak. But this time, Jason Voorhees may finally meet his end. Or will he?
Jason!
The concept of ending the franchise with the final chapter was suggested by producer Frank Mancuso Jr., son of Paramount CEO Frank Mancuso Sr. Mancuso Jr.'s frustrations stemmed from a feeling that his contributions to both Friday the 13th Part 2 and 3 were undervalued, even though the films had been making a substantial amount of money for the studio. This sentiment, coupled with the fact that Paramount was aware of the seeming waning interest in the slasher subgenre, regardless of the aforementioned profits of the Friday the 13th franchise specifically, led Mancuso Jr. to advocate for concluding the series by eliminating Jason Voorhees for good, and thus ending the franchise on, hopefully, a high note. For the fourth installment, Joseph Zito, known for The Prowler, was recruited to both direct and pen the script. Though hesitant about writing, Zito accepted the offer when the deal paid for both roles. However, he used the extra funds to employ Barney Cohen for scripting. Their collaborative efforts involved nightly discussions with Phil Scuderi. Though Cohen was credited, he later faced issues with the Writers Guild of America because of this. The film boasts a cast that brings a unique blend of horror, suspense, and even humor to the iconic slasher series. Corey Feldman gives a memorable performance as Tommy Jarvis, a young boy with a knack for masks and makeup effects, and who becomes a central figure in the franchise's narrative. Kimberly Beck portrays Trish Jarvis, Tommy's protective older sister, bringing depth and resilience to her role as she finds herself fending off the relentless killer. But it's not all terror and screams. Crispin Glover stands out in a hilariously offbeat portrayal of Jimmy, providing some of the film's most comedic moments. His eccentric dance sequence alone has been a talking point among fans and critics alike, adding an unexpected layer of levity to the otherwise grim proceedings.
Don't think you got it made, no. You're wrong. 'Cause you can't make it anymore. I know what you're waiting.
This ensemble of characters and their interactions elevate the film beyond its horror roots, offering audiences a multifaceted viewing experience. Regarding the film's hockey-masked madman, Ted White takes on the iconic role of Jason Voorhees, bringing an intensified and very different portrayal than his predecessors. Clad in his signature clothing first seen in Part 3 and wielding the emblematic hockey mask, this version of Jason is a very nightmarish figure. His hulking presence is felt more forebodingly than ever before, and with White at the helm, Jason's demeanor exudes a raw, relentless energy. He is not the lumbering, almost passive monster from the previous films. Instead, he is portrayed as a more aggressive, fast, and brutally efficient killer. White's interpretation showed a Jason who seemed hell-bent on hunting his victims with an animalistic fervor, making him an even more formidable and terrifying force within the overall world of horror movie villains. Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter, is notable for the return of Tom Savini, the mastermind behind the iconic special makeup effects of the original film. Savini's comeback for this installment ensured a continuation of the visceral and groundbreaking practical effects that the series was known for, adding another layer to the foundation that cemented his legacy in the annals of horror cinema. Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter began its filming process in Topanga Canyon and Newhall, California, spanning from October 1983 to January 1984. Originally, the film was scheduled for an October 1984 release. However, the studio made a strategic decision to move the release date to April 13th, which considerably shortened the post-production timeline to just 6 weeks. Unique to this installment, Paramount Pictures became actively involved in the production process. They even went as far as renting a house in Malibu to facilitate and expedite the editing process for the filmmakers. Not only did this provide a conducive environment for work, but Paramount also ensured that the crew was well fed, with meals being delivered directly to them at the editing venue. Harry Manfredini, the composer who had previously scored parts 1 through 3, returned to the franchise once again for the final chapter, enriching the film's runtime with bleak, moody, and extremely spooky music that perfectly encapsulates the essence of this entry. And regarding the music within the final chapter, here's a fun fact. In the scene where Crispin Glover is dancing hilariously to Love Is a Lie by the band called Lion, he was actually dancing to the song Back in Black by AC/DC while on set.
What? It says you're a dead fuck. What? A dead fuck? A lousy lay. You know? Dead. Oh, I see. Oh, don't hold it back from me, Doc. I can take it. Give it to me straight. I did not say it. The computer did. Yeah, well, there is no computer. Aha! And there's no Betty either.
Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter, really is the perfect slasher movie. From its electrifying start, the film grips the audience's attention and maintains it with a relentless intensity, an intensity that doesn't concede until the end credits begin rolling, making it not only one of the most remarkable entries in the Friday the 13th series, but also one of the most noteworthy horror films of all time. Every element of the movie, from the acting chops tailored perfectly to the story's needs, to its impeccable pacing, serves to elevate its prominence. The cinematography is captivating, the atmosphere drips with tension, the music accentuates every emotion, and the kills are executed with a brutal intensity that leaves the viewers in awe. Ted White's portrayal of Jason Voorhees is iconic, providing an intensity and rawness that is unparalleled, while Corey Feldman masterfully introduces us to Tommy Jarvis. Jarvis is not just a passing character, but a linchpin of the series, continuing his story into subsequent installments. The film does need more Crispin Glover, though, as his presence was both hilarious and intriguing. Perhaps allowing his character more screen time, or even letting him survive, would have added an additional layer of intrigue that could have worked really well here. Additionally, extending the runtime by about 15 to 20 minutes would have also been a welcome change, allowing for deeper facets of the story to be explored, like showing news coverage from all around Crystal Lake, showcasing the murders at Higgins Haven and the camp from Part 2, since this is technically the same week as Jason's rampage from Parts 2 and 3, and technically several days after the events of Part 2, far removed from the Friday the 13th date itself at this point, but at least directly acknowledging how close in proximity these murders happened to the portion of Crystal Lake seen in the final chapter. I mean, at least have the mom be aware of what's going on right down the shore. But I digress, and nevertheless, the final chapter is a masterclass in slasher cinema, in and of itself, and truly is perfect as is, and its recap of the events from the previous 3 films right at the beginning of the film ensures that newcomers can savor its brilliance as is, without having to go back and watch the preceding entries. However, watching those films does enhance the experience of the final chapter, obviously, but it's not a requirement in order to fully enjoy this movie, which is very cool.
You better get that sucker in the icebox! I must be nuts! I really... Good night, Axel.
Also, on a side note, this is the best version of unmasked Jason Voorhees in the series thus far, with his look in this film being far superior to the red-headed bearded hillbilly hobo of Part 2, and certainly better than the derpy hobgoblin of Part 3. Just wanted to point that fact out. His look in this film actually looks like a grown-up version of the young Jason Voorhees we briefly saw in the original film, which of course is thanks to the return of Tom Savini. With that said, Joseph Zito's Friday the 13th, the final chapter, is a crystal skull. From filmmaker Danny Steinman comes the unexpected, at least at the time, 5th entry in the mighty Friday the 13th franchise, featuring a new location not nestled directly on the shorefronts of Crystal Lake, a slew of characters that are as cartoonish as they are endearing, and a hockey-masked madman that may or may not be Jason Voorhees back from the grave. Let's take a look at 1985's Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning. A New Beginning has been prominently featured in my main Friday the 13th viewing rotation for decades and decades. It's absolutely the weirdest, sleaziest, and most bizarre entry of the franchise, at least out of the first 8 movies. Jason Goes to Hell may be more bizarre than this film, but regardless, Friday the 13th Part 5 is a Friday the 13th staple as far as I'm concerned, and like other notable entries in the franchise, such as Parts 4, 6, and 8, I never get tired of watching this sequel, and it's only gotten better and more enjoyable with time.
You scared of spiders? You scared of rubber spiders? You scared of rubber spiders on strings? Man, you are one scared cat.
Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning, follows the story of Tommy Jarvis, an older version of the character seen in the final chapter, who's been traumatized by his past encounter with Jason Voorhees. Tommy is sent to a halfway house for troubled teens in the countryside, still in the Crystal Lake area, but unlike the settings of the preceding 4 films, not directly lakefront. Soon after Tommy's arrival, a series of grisly murders begin, suggesting the possible return of Jason Voorhees himself, or the dark doings of Tommy Jarvis. However, by the end of the film, it's revealed that the killer is not Jason Voorhees at all, or Tommy for that matter, but a man named Roy Burns, a paramedic seeking vengeance for the death of his son, who was a resident at the halfway house, up until his murder. Friday the 13th, A New Beginning was initially introduced under the pseudonym Repetition, leaving several of its actors, including the lead John Shepherd, in the dark about its true identity as part of the Friday the 13th franchise. Shepherd, deeply dedicated to his role, had even spent a significant amount of time volunteering at a mental hospital in anticipation of his character. The revelation that he was starring in the 5th iteration of this horror series was a disappointment to him. Friday the 13th Part 5 was filmed at various locations throughout California, such as Agora Hills, Camarillo, Beverly Hills, and the Franklin Canyon Reservoir. The cast includes Melanie Kinnaman as Pam, Richard Young as Matt, the aforementioned John Shepard as Tommy Jarvis, Corey Feldman as young Tommy Jarvis, Dick Wayne as Roy Burns, Shavar Ross as Reggie the Reckless, Juliette Cummins as Robin, Tiffany Helm as Violet, Miguel Nunez as Demon, Deborah Voorhees as Tina, Mark Venturini as Victor, Dominic Braccia as Joey, Marco St. John as the Sheriff, John Robert Dixon as Eddie, plus an absolute slew of others, with the film's wackiest and most hilariously zany contributions coming from the characters Ethel and Junior, played in glorious fashion by Carol Locatell and Ron Sloan, respectively.
Say it like you mean it, Ma!
Would you shut the fuck up?
In the opening dream sequence of the film, Jason Voorhees was played by Johnny Hawk, whereas stuntman Tom Morga portrayed the hallucinations of Jason for the remainder of the film. Morga was also primarily responsible for playing Roy Burns once the character donned his Jason-esque getup. Fun fact, Dick Warlock, Halloween 2's Michael Myers himself, was the stunt coordinator on Friday 5.
Looks like we got us a maniac on the loose, huh, Sheriff?
Corey Feldman, due to his simultaneous commitments to the Goonies, could only afford a brief appearance in A New Beginning. The scenes featuring Feldman were filmed during his break from the Goonies in his family's backyard in Los Angeles, complete with a rain machine.
Wait a minute. Especially for the occasion.
Director Danny Steinman was candid about the excessive amount of nudity he shot for the film, much of which later was cut out. An interesting fact about this particular installment of the series is its unique hockey mask design. It features 2 blue chevrons pointing downward, deviating from the series' usual design, at least thus far in the franchise, of 3 red chevrons with the lower 2 directed upwards. Harry Manfredini returned to the series once again to create the score for the film, and to be honest, I think it's one of the best in the franchise. There's some different cues and compositions on display within the music of this film that really sets it apart from the 4 preceding films, and contains moments that feel much more aggressive and frenetic than what came before. For a film as weird and sleazy as this one, the score is absolutely insane. And speaking of music, the film also boasts one of the best songs to ever grace a Friday the 13th movie, His Eyes by Pseudo Echo, a terrifically spooky 80s anthem forever burned into our brains, and one that is perfectly aligned with Violet's dance sequence. I really enjoy the look of Roy Burns' Jason-esque outfit in this film. The bald undermask, the unique hockey mask with the blue chevrons, the bluish-gray coveralls, the clean machete, all of it. Although this wasn't in fact Jason Voorhees himself, Roy Burns feels like a force to be reckoned with nonetheless, a scorned father reaping the sweets of revenge upon the helpless idiots of Pinehurst Halfway House over the murder of his son Joey. The looks of both Zombie Jason and Hallucination Jason throughout the film are killer as well, giving Jason a gnarlier look than we'd ever seen before, bloodied and tattered and seen only through the semi-psychotic eyes of Tommy Jarvis himself. One of the most interesting aspects of Friday the 13th Part 5 is the return of the whodunit style of storytelling, a key aspect of the original film, but one that wasn't implemented in Parts 2, 3, and 4 since we knew Jason was the killer by that point. However, unlike the original film, the whodunit style of story execution is very different in A New Beginning. While the original film gave you absolutely no clue about who the killer was until the actual reveal, A New Beginning attempts to confuse the audience by directly offering 3 seemingly obvious choices of who the killer could be. Roy Burns, due to the crazy death stare close-ups and weird interactions with the police, the head of Pinehurst halfway house, Matt, who sort of disappears before the third act of the movie, and of course, Tommy Jarvis himself, who the film spends a lot of its runtime showcasing how crazy he's becoming. Obviously, we now know that the killer ends up being Roy, but I found the intentional confusion that the film creates for its audience to be a big breath of fresh air, and only adds to the frenetic zaniness of the runtime.
That is one fucking ugly man that goes there.
That's one fucking ugly man, Mama.
Would you shut your trap? You know, you ain't so pretty yourself, you know.
I ain't so pretty myself, I know.
I absolutely loved this movie, and as far as attempts to continue a franchise after its lead villain is dead and gone go, this one takes the cake, and it does it in a very slick, sleazy, and fun way. And that's one of the best attributes about Part 5. It is a fun time to be had. Not nearly as fun as what would follow in Jason Lives, but fun nonetheless, while also managing to retain some of the gritty, grim tone of the final chapter. You have to hand it to Frank Mancuso Jr. here, who after thinking he'd kill Jason and the franchise for good in the final chapter, knocked it out of the park when it came time to resurrect the franchise yet again, because A New Beginning is a terrific sequel, and legitimately delivers the goods in a world where Jason Voorhees is legitimately dead, yet the legacy of the hockey-masked madman lives on. Everything from the pacing, to the score, to the punctual editing, to the simple yet endearing cinematography, absolutely works for me in this movie. The acting chops are perfectly acceptable for the story on display here, the zany array of characters are extremely memorable and out of this world, especially Ethel and Jr., who are undeniably funny and goofy and charming in the most hilarious ways possible, and are absolutely 2 of the most memorable characters of the entire franchise.
Do you hear me? Are you hearing me, boy? Get off that fucking bike and come here and eat my stew!
My only real gripe with this movie is that I felt it was a bit too short, and I would like to have seen Roy say at least a few words before plunging to his death at the end of the film. Other than that, between Pam and Reggie the Reckless and those damn enchiladas, Friday the 13th: A New Beginning is a great sequel, a terrific departure from the norm, and an absolute blast of a Friday the 13th movie. And I love every single bloody, sleazy, gross, weird, and offbeat moment of it. Plus, it has this weird, cozy, early 1980s television special vibe to it that I can't explain, but I absolutely love. With that said, Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning, is a masterpiece. From filmmaker Tom McLaughlin comes the mighty 6th entry of the infamous Friday the 13th franchise, the 1986 slasher epic that marks the franchise's first full-blown step into the realm of the supernatural. Featuring a fantastic array of characters, some brilliantly funny yet scary moments, an absolutely killer soundtrack, and a version of Jason Voorhees unlike anything we've seen before, let's take a look at Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives. For as far back as I can remember, Jason Lives has been my favorite film in the Friday the 13th franchise, standing tall as the epitome of not just what a perfect Jason movie should be, but what a perfect slasher movie should be. And on that note, Jason Lives is also my favorite horror movie of all time, so you can already get somewhat of an idea of how beloved this movie is for me, not just because of childhood nostalgia, but because of how enjoyable the film continues to be, how different of a slasher movie it still is, and how much of an absolute blast it is to watch. Once this movie starts, it starts. And for its entire runtime, you as the viewer are riding a roller coaster of horror and suspense and comedy that never lets up until the movie is over. Jason Lives is an absolute adventure from start to finish.
I'll order up some body bags.
Our boy sure wants us to believe his story.
Well, he picked the right day to pull this shit.
What do you mean?
Happy Friday the 13th.
The film begins with Tommy Jarvis, now an adult, yet still very much tormented by the nightmarish memory of Jason Voorhees. Intent on ensuring that Jason is indeed truly dead, Tommy travels to the cemetery where Jason is buried. In an ill-conceived attempt to confront and overcome his fears, Tommy exhumes Jason's body. However, things go terribly wrong when lightning strikes a metal rod that Tommy had plunged into Jason's corpse, miraculously resurrecting the infamous murderer as an undead force of nature. With his superhuman strength enhanced, Jason sets out on a killing spree once again, determined to return to his original stomping grounds, Camp Crystal Lake. After attempting to warn the local authorities about Jason's return, Sheriff Garris dismisses Tommy's crazy ramblings and believes Tommy himself to be a potential threat, and jails him for the night. Meanwhile, Jason quickly gets back to his old habits, taking out various victims in and around the camp, including camp counselors and anybody else unfortunate enough to cross his path on the way there. As the body count rises, Megan, the sheriff's daughter, who is smitten with Tommy, becomes convinced of his sincerity regarding Jason Voorhees and helps him escape. Together, they devise a plan to trap Jason in the lake for good. In the climactic battle, Tommy manages to chain Jason to a boulder and submerge him in the lake. While this doesn't kill the seemingly unkillable murderer, it does trap him underwater, bringing about a temporary end to Jason's undead reign of terror. Despite the financial success of Friday the 13th: A New Beginning, its poor reception led producers, determined to not further distance Friday fans, to recalibrate the series' direction after Part 5. Frank Mancuso Jr. brought on Tom McLaughlin, the director of One Dark Night, to guide this change. McLaughlin, inspired by the 1931 Frankenstein and other similar horror archetypes, reinvented Jason Voorhees as a supernatural entity, and connecting Jason Lives directly to the final chapter, with the events of Part 5 not necessarily excised, but simply not addressed directly. This new direction incorporated action, meta-humor, and references to classic Gothic horror, such as Edgar Allan Poe, with nods to McLaughlin's Catholic upbringing, making Jason Lives the first film in the series with explicit references to the supernatural. McLaughlin also introduced self-aware humor, with the characters commenting on horror movie tropes, and even breaking the fourth wall.
Some folks have a strange idea of entertainment.
While Jason Lives was initially considered a direct sequel to A New Beginning, survivors Pam and Reggie were meant to die early in the story. But once John Shepard, the Tommy Jarvis from Part 5 dropped out of the project entirely, the termination of returning contracts for other New Beginning surviving cast members ensued, and A New Beginning itself, as previously mentioned, was sort of just not talked about, narratively, within the runtime of Jason Lives.
Don't beat him up too bad, Dad. He's kind of cute.
Megan, leave.
Mancuso wanted the final girl of Jason Lives to be a, quote, very attractive blonde, leading to the selection of Jennifer Cook from the TV show V. Ron Palillo, known for Welcome Back Kotter, played Hawes, Tommy's short-lived sidekick. John Shepard, who played Tommy in Part 5, declined to return for religious reasons and was replaced by Tom Matthews, known for The Return of the Living Dead. Director Tom McLaughlin cast familiar actors, including David Kagan as Sheriff Garris and his wife Nancy. After one day of filming, Mancuso replaced stuntman Dan Bradley with C.J. Graham, a local restaurant manager and ex-soldier, as Jason Voorhees, due to dissatisfaction with Bradley's on-screen presence, although Bradley's scenes in the paintball sequence were retained in the film. Graham was discovered after playing Jason in a stage show, catching the eye of the film's special effects coordinator, Martin Becker.
Nikki, somebody's out there. What if it's that guy Jason?
I don't want to know.
Unique to the franchise, Jason Lives features no nudity, a deliberate choice by director Tom McLaughlin to diverge from the series' trope of punishing premarital relations. Though producers pressured her for a topless scene, actress Darcy DeMoss declined.
Will you go out and plug the cord back in?
Who unplugged the cord?
Smokey the freaking bear. I don't know. Just go do it.
Do you know how cold it is out there?
I don't give a shit, Court. Go do it.
The film was primarily shot in Covington, Georgia, while the campground scenes were shot at Camp Daniel Morgan in Georgia. Interestingly, a portion of the climactic lake scenes were filmed in McLaughlin's father's pool. Director McLaughlin's vision for a distinct Friday the 13th film was met with studio demands for added violence and gore. While the original edit had 13 deaths as a nod to the film's title, the studio's insistence led to the inclusion of 3 additional deaths. Among the alterations, Sissy's death was also extended for added brutality. Controversy also arose regarding the film's conclusion. Originally scripted to end in the graveyard with the introduction of Jason's father, Elias, the studio rejected this due to concerns about explaining Elias's backstory in subsequent sequels. This scene was meant to address a continuity error concerning Jason's supposed cremation, passingly talked about by the mayor in Part 5, but since this ending never materialized, the mayor's assertions in A New Beginning can simply be chalked up to misinformation.
His body was cremated. He's nothing but a handful of ash.
You know that for sure, Mayor? Were you there? Did you see him cremated?
Jason Voorhees.
Yeah.
I can't believe this. Here. This is your Jason Voorhees here. This.
McLaughlin filmed 3 separate endings. 2 were rejected for their ambiguous portrayal of Jason's fate, leading to the accepted finale, highlighting Jason's still-opened eye beneath the water, signaling for his potential return in a subsequent sequel.
Does he think I'm a farthead?
The spooky landscape of the film was enriched by the compositions of Harry Manfredini, a staple of the series at that point, having crafted the scores for all of the prior installments. And I have to say, when it comes to the franchise as a whole, Manfredini usually does fantastic work, but with Jason Lives, he absolutely knocked it out of the park. I mean, this score is by far the best score out of the entire franchise, and is one of those scores that, whenever you hear a composition from it, you feel totally immersed in the world of the film, whether you're actually watching the movie or not. It's fantastic, fantastic stuff. Manfredini really outdid himself on Jason Lives. However, the auditory experience of the film was not just limited to Manfredini's iconic arrangements. It also boomed with a selection of songs from the mighty Alice Cooper, as well as a track from Felony. Cooper's distinctive rock edge echoed throughout the film, with tracks like He's Back, Teenage Frankenstein, and Hard Rock Summer. The latter two are from his Constrictor album, while Hard Rock Summer can be found in the box set titled The Life and Crimes of Alice Cooper. Adding more texture to the soundtrack was the song I'm No Animal by Felony, hailing from their album Vigilante. Alice Cooper's He's Back, the man behind the mask, was particularly celebrated, even spawning a music video that married scenes from the film with exclusive new footage showcasing Cooper, as well as C.J. Graham himself in Jason Voorhees attire. In 1986, Simon Hawke penned a novelization of Friday the 13th Part 6. Intriguingly, the book includes a portrayal of Mr. Voorhees, Jason's father, whose appearance was intended for the film, but was eventually omitted. Additionally, the novel delves deeper into Jason's early life and further develops the histories of characters like Tommy and Sheriff Garris. Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, is the quintessential entry in the Friday the 13th series, with its perfect blend of horror, humor, and iconic Jason Voorhees moments. This chapter in the series possesses a unique charm and style, distinguishing it from its predecessors and successors. Over the years, fans and critics alike have continuously held it in high regard, praising its craftsmanship and its distinctive take on the infamous Masked Killer. And among the series' long line of sequels, prequels, and reboots, the only other film that arguably comes close to achieving the reverence and acclaim of Part 6 is the final chapter.
A dead fuck?
Jason Lives stands out not only for its story, but also for its impressive technical and creative aspects. The score is hauntingly memorable, while the soundtrack perfectly complements the film's tone. Cinematography-wise, the movie is a treat. It possesses a smooth, efficient quality that is both simple yet artful. The lighting and mood create an undeniably tantalizing atmosphere, immersing the viewers into the chilling world of Camp Crystal Lake. Each frame is crafted with purpose, and it's evident that a great deal of thought went into the film's visual language. The ensemble of characters brings the narrative to life in the most riveting of ways. Tom Matthews, portraying the character of Tommy Jarvis, delivers what many believe to be the ultimate rendition of the character, myself included. Megan shines as a captivating final girl, while David Kagan's portrayal of Sheriff Garris steals the show, setting a gold standard for sheriffs in horror cinema. The comedic elements are cleverly infused without detracting from the spine-tingling terror. Instead, they enhance the overall viewing experience, striking a good balance that many horror films strive for but rarely achieve.
You got a description of plates?
I got the whole enchilada. It's a 77 orange Camaro, license number Mary William 8510.
That's my daughter's car.
How do you want us to proceed?
Extreme care, asshole. If that kid is with her, there's every good chance he'll do something crazy.
Yet, central to the film's success is its titular antagonist, Jason Voorhees. This iteration of Jason, brought to life by C.J. Graham, is the definitive portrayal of the character. While predecessors like Ted White and successors like Kane Hodder left their commendable marks on the character, it's Graham's embodiment that feels the most iconic. For me at least. His interpretation seamlessly combines the human and supernatural facets of Jason Voorhees, making him the embodiment of fear while retaining a slight touch of the tragic. When I envision Jason Voorhees, it's this version that looms largest, a testament to the lasting impact of Jason Lives. I also need to point out how hilarious it is to me that, since Jason was dead and buried at the start of this movie, and Tommy Jarvis, like an idiot, chose to dig him up, leading to lightning striking and bringing Jason back to life in the first place, as the unkillable zombie we all know and love, then one could say that every single death linked to Jason Voorhees, from the events of Part 6 onwards, was the indirect result of Tommy Jarvis's dumb decision to dig up Jason in the first place. I mean, come on, Jarvis. I actually made a meme about this several years ago, so if you've ever seen this meme floating around the interwebs, just know it was yours truly who did it. Jason Lives is an absolute blast from start to finish, and Tom McLaughlin absolutely made a monster of a film here, pun intended, and my only wish is that we had a 4-hour extended cut to sink our teeth into. Here's to hoping for that someday. With all that said, Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, is a crystal skull. From filmmaker and special effects madman John Carl Buechler comes the absolutely insane 7th installment in the Friday the 13th franchise, presumably taking place several years after the conclusion of Jason Lives. This entry introduces us to an angrier version of Jason Voorhees than we'd ever seen before, and also marks the first time the character was played by the man, the myth, the legend himself, Kane Hodder. Filled with weird characters, weird dialogue, a more serious tone than that of Jason Lives, and a new final girl, equipped with telekinetic powers, let's take a look at Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood. I have a fondness for the latter films of the Friday the 13th series, particularly during the climax of the Paramount Pictures phase, before venturing into the subsequent films from New Line Cinema. What captivates me about these sequels? Perhaps it's their sheer oddity, their peculiar charm, or a combination of both. But it's unmistakable how they stretch their creative muscles, presenting narratives in the most delightfully eccentric ways. If you've ever heard my thoughts on Jason Lives, you'd know it ranks as my top pick in the series, with the final chapter trailing just a smidgen behind. With that said, parts 7 and 8 are not far off by comparison. They may not reach the pinnacle of the other two mentioned, but they have their unique, intoxicating allure that in some ways allows them to contend with the top-tier Friday the 13th entries. The New Blood, acting as the 7th installment of the series, does not disappoint whatsoever, though it is a completely different beast than any of the preceding films. It serves as an excellent slasher movie, a commendable continuation of Jason's saga after the events of Jason Lives, and notably ushers in Kane Hodder's era of Jason Voorhees.
Dan, what are you doing?
film starts with a young girl named Tina Shepard, who possesses telekinetic powers. After witnessing her father's abusive behavior towards her mother, Tina, in a fit of emotional distress, unintentionally uses her powers to collapse the dock he's standing on, causing him to drown in Crystal Lake. Years later, Tina, now a teenager, is still traumatized by the event and returns to the family cabin on Crystal Lake with her mother and her therapist, Dr. Cruz. Unbeknownst to Tina, Dr. Cruz is more interested in studying and exploiting her powers rather than helping her cope with her trauma. In a bid to communicate with her deceased father using her telekinesis, Tina accidentally frees the dormant and chained Jason Voorhees from the depths of Crystal Lake, where he was left at the end of the previous installment. Once resurrected, Jason returns to his murderous ways, targeting a group of teenagers staying nearby for a birthday celebration. Tina becomes aware of Jason's carnage and, with her telekinetic powers, confronts him multiple times. The climax of the film sees a battle between Tina and Jason. Using her telekinesis, Tina fights off Jason and even manages to summon the spirit of her father, who drags Jason back into the depths of Crystal Lake. Following Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, which saw the return of the character Jason Voorhees from the dead, there were plans for Part 7 to feature a crossover event between Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger. The Friday the 13th sequels witnessed a decline in box office earnings, while the Nightmare on Elm Street movies consistently garnered about double the revenue. Paramount Pictures, which owned the Friday the 13th series, approached New Line Cinema, the company that had the rights to Elm Street. The proposition was for Paramount to manage domestic distribution and for New Line to oversee international markets. However, the collaboration fell through due to disagreements between the two studios. It wasn't until New Line acquired the rights to Jason Voorhees that Freddy vs. Jason eventually materialized in 2003. But back to Part 7. For Part 7, associate producer Barbara Sachs pitched an idea reminiscent of Jaws. In her version, a business mogul would conceal the past horrors associated with Jason Voorhees to lucratively develop properties around Crystal Lake. Frank Mancuso Jr., however, the executive producer, was not on board with this concept. Screenwriter Daryl Haney introduced a fresh perspective. What if the sole remaining teenager confronting Jason had telepathic abilities, or telekinetic abilities for that matter? Sachs found this, quote, Jason vs. Carrie angle compelling, and aimed for this addition to the franchise to have a distinguished appeal, even jokingly hoping for an Academy Award. To elevate the film, names of renowned directors, including the legendary Italian director Federico Fellini, were floated. Initially going by Birthday Bash as its working title to disguise its association with the Friday the 13th franchise, the film's production was rapid, spanning 7 months from inception to release. Filming occurred in Baldwin County, Alabama, specifically at Burns Lake, between October and November of 1987, with additional shooting in Mobile during February 1988. Kane Hodder made his debut as Jason in this installment, going on to portray the character in 3 subsequent films after this one, making him the only actor to do so multiple times. Kane had previously worked with John Carl Buechler on the film Prison, which Buechler was doing the special makeup effects for, which saw Hodder taking on the role of a resurrected prisoner. At Hodder's own suggestion, a chilling scene was filmed where he allowed live maggots to pour from his mouth, capturing the essence of decay. Buechler was impressed by Hodder's commitment and thus chose him over C.J. Graham for the new blood. While Graham had aspired to be as iconic as Boris Karloff's Frankenstein, he gracefully accepted Hodder's portrayal and held no grudge over the recasting. Hodder's commitment shone when he set a record for the longest unedited on-screen controlled burn in Hollywood. In a scene where Tina's powers unleash furnace flames onto Jason, Hodder was genuinely set ablaze. The entire scene, lasting an astonishing 40 seconds, was captured live, setting an unparalleled cinematic benchmark. While a critic of the time pointed out that the movie seemed tame, with minimal blood and gore compared to the typical 80s slasher film, it's worth noting that an absolute slew of graphic content had to be removed from the final cut. These changes were made to steer clear of receiving an X rating, which indicates just how intense the original content was. The director's intent to push boundaries was evident, but ultimately, certain sacrifices had to be made to ensure the film reached a broader audience.
Dan, where are you?
This time around, Harry Manfredini did not return to the franchise to score The New Blood, and although cues he previously made for Jason Lives were used sporadically throughout the film, the bulk of the score for Friday 7 was composed by Fred Mullen, who brought an eerie new take on Friday the 13th to the woods of Crystal Lake. Although the score is decent, and I do enjoy the compositions on display here, it's not really one of my favorites, and something just feels a bit non-Friday the 13th, at least for my taste, especially when compared to Manfredini's work on the preceding films. It's not a bad score, though, when taken in isolation. Jason's design in The New Blood is nothing short of astonishing. It masterfully conveys a sense of decay and foreboding. He isn't just rotten, he resembles a nightmarish combination of a partially skeletal figure covered with decaying meat. The waterlogged texture gives him an even more eerie and haunting appearance, as if he's just emerged from the depths of a murky abyss. Which he did. Kane Hodder's portrayal of Jason, even under layers of makeup and prosthetics, brings a distinct intensity to the character. His performance introduces a fresh, rage-fueled dimension to the iconic hockey-masked madman that remains unparalleled. The genius behind this innovative design is none other than John Carl Buechler, who truly surpassed all expectations for this rendition of Jason. An unforgettable moment in the film is when Jason's mask is removed, revealing a skull-faced visage of sheer horror underneath. The initial shock and anger that flashes across Jason's maskless face remain iconic and horrifying even all these years later. The decision to have Jason without his hockey mask for a significant part of the third act added an unexpected layer of intrigue, offering viewers a raw glimpse into the sheer terror that truly defined the character. In Friday the 13th, The New Blood, the ensemble cast presents an intriguing mix of characters that can be described as both memorable and, at times, awkward. At the forefront, Tina Shepard, portrayed by Larpark Lincoln, stands out as a fantastic heroine, setting her apart with her telekinetic abilities and her emotional depth, which offers a fresh and unique twist to the franchise. Her struggles with trauma and her chaotic interactions with the manipulative Dr. Cruz, played with commendable sleaziness by Terry Kaiser, drive much of the movie's tension. while some of the film's dialogue and performances border on cringeworthy, making it a curious departure from the more polished casts of parts 4 or 6, there are undeniable standouts. Kane Hodder's portrayal of Jason Voorhees is menacing and iconic, and Kevin Spiertas brings a strong and supportive performance as Nick, Tina's love interest. All these elements, combined with the bizarre dynamics of the rest of the cast, make this installment in the series both entertaining and, at moments, endearingly offbeat. The film also presents a noticeable tonal shift from its immediate predecessors, where Jason Lives embraced a fun and frenetic energy, and A New Beginning took a dive into the realm of eccentric zaniness. The New Blood steered the franchise into much darker waters. This entry opted for a heavier, more somber atmosphere, riddled with grim undertones, and an almost palpable sense of dread. While some viewers, myself included, appreciated the film's sinister tone, I think it's very possible that the broader audience might have warmed up to the movie more had it not been for this pervasive sense of doom. The narrative surrounding Jason Voorhees has always been one rooted in horror, but the addition of a few lighter, even comedic moments in earlier entries served as a counterbalance. The New Blood, despite its handful of eccentric characters, leans heavily into its mean-spirited sensibility, making it a distinct, if divisive, chapter in the franchise's storied history. I also need to point out how absolutely awesome the opening recap is at the beginning of the film, recanting the legend of Jason Voorhees and showing clips from all of the previous movies. Except Part 5, obviously. It ties the preceding entries of the franchise into the grim atmosphere on display within The New Blood, and even makes the ending of Jason Lives seem much more serious and dark than it actually was, giving the franchise as a whole this gritty and hardcore flavor that seems much more pronounced due to the style of this recap. It's fantastic, and is simply not talked about enough. Fun fact: Walter J. Gorney, who played Crazy Ralph in the first 2 movies of the series, is actually the guy narrating the legend of Jason during the recap. I mean, how cool is that?
People forget. He's down there, waiting.
When it's all said and done, The New Blood, minimal grievances aside, really is a terrific Friday the 13th movie. It's well made, it takes a bold step, tonally, with the franchise, the key players of the movie are all fantastic, despite the weird ensemble that surrounds them, the music is decent, the pacing is decent, the cinematography is simple yet perfect, the atmosphere and the mood of the film is dark and serious and grim in the best ways, the special effects are excellent and charming, and still hold up to this day, the woods of Crystal Lake look dried and dead and dark and cold and unwelcome throughout the entirety of the film's runtime, which feels perfectly in line for the tone of this movie. And Kane Hodder, as this angry new version of Jason Voorhees, is simply compelling. The New Blood truly is slasher movie bliss, and its aforementioned misgivings, like many horror movies of that nature, only add to the film's overall novelty, especially through the lens of time, making this not only one of the best movies in the franchise overall, but one of the darkest and bleakest slasher movies ever made, and is unconditionally relentless from start to finish, and I am here for every single moment of it. With that said, John Carl Buechler's Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood, is a masterpiece. From filmmaker Rob Headon comes the infamous 8th installment of the bloody good Friday the 13th franchise, featuring an all-new cast, a river that somehow leads from Crystal Lake to the ocean, a doomed cruise ship, and the city that never sleeps, New York City, not to mention the epic return of Kane Hodder as Jason Voorhees, let's take a look at the highly debated Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. Now, I've said this about quite a few of the Friday the 13th entries, but I would absolutely be lying if I didn't say it again regarding Jason Takes Manhattan. Friday the 13th Part 8 has absolutely been one of my favorite entries of the franchise for as long as I can remember. With that said, Jason Lives by far remains my favorite entry of the franchise, with the final chapter trailing close behind that. But to this day, I do sometimes flip-flop on whether or not Jason Takes Manhattan is my second favorite of the franchise over the final chapter. I mean, both of these movies are just quintessential Jason movies, hyper-stylized and unapologetic in their execution, and even as weird and bizarre and quirky as Jason Takes Manhattan is, it still sometimes manages to compete with the final chapter. Sometimes. The spooky corridors of the cruise ship, the insane hallucinations, the vibrant yellow hockey mask, Jason's slimy black outfit, his fishy pale skin, the backdrop of NYC, and so on and so forth. There really is just so much to enjoy about Jason Takes Manhattan, and it kills me that its fan base isn't bigger than it is.
You're all gonna die.
The story of Friday the 13th Part 8 begins on the surface of Crystal Lake, with teenager Jim Miller sharing the spooky legend of Jason Voorhees with his girlfriend Susie. The zombified serial killer boards the boat, steals a hockey mask from Jim, and kills both Jim and Susie in very grisly fashion. The subsequent day, the SS Lazarus, after the underwhelming financial results of Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood, the development of a sequel was initiated by director John Carl Buechler, with a focus on the character Tina Shepard, portrayed by Lar Park Lincoln, encountering Jason Voorhees after a stint at a mental hospital. Meanwhile, alternate scripts were developed by Lincoln and her co-star Kevin Spiritus, each exploring different narratives for Tina and the aftermath of The New Blood. However, Paramount ended up entrusting the project to writer-director Rob Hedden instead, who sought to transition Jason Voorhees from the familiar Camp Crystal Lake area to all new locations such as a cruise ship and New York City. Hedden's ideas, although grand in scale at first, were eventually condensed due to budgetary constraints. Hedden also aimed to delve into Voorhees' childhood, explored through hallucinations of the film's heroine, Rennie. The early script circulated covertly under the title Ashes to Ashes to mask its association with the Friday the 13th franchise. Actress Jensen Daggett secured the leading role of Rennie, prevailing over Elizabeth Berkley and Pamela Anderson in the audition process. Lisa Wilcox, despite being offered a part in the film, chose to decline. Scott Reeves was a last-minute casting call for the role of Sean Robertson, as producers believed the actor initially cast lacked romantic chemistry with Daggett. Peter Mark Richmond joined the cast as Charles McCulloch, acting as the educator of the student characters and the uncle to Rennie, with Barbara Bingham as Colleen Van Dusen and V.C. Dupree as Julius. The rest of the cast was fleshed out by acting newcomers and genre regulars alike, who all did a serviceable, if not a great job, with their own respective parts. The movie began filming in April of 1989, and although several locations in the United States were used for filming, the bulk of principal photography took place in British Columbia, Canada, specifically in Vancouver. The sequences set in the NYC alleyways were captured in Vancouver as well. Upon concluding the shoots in Los Angeles, the remainder of the movie was filmed on-site in New York City. The Times Square scenes were filmed amid pedestrian spectators, drawing the attention of several Friday the 13th enthusiasts. Mullen composed the musical score for Jason Takes Manhattan, having previously collaborated with the regular Friday the 13th series composer, Harry Manfredini, on the preceding film, where cues from Manfredini's preceding Friday scores were peppered throughout The New Blood, in addition to Mullen's contributions of new content. Jason Takes Manhattan stands out as the first movie in the series where Manfredini is not credited for the score whatsoever. Unlike the new compositions he did for The New Blood, which I thought were decent at best, I absolutely dig Fred Mullins' Jason Takes Manhattan score. The Darkest Side of the Night, performed by Metropolis, overlays the film's opening and closing credits. The director, Rob Hedden, specifically aimed for a song that echoed the style of Robert Plant. Notably, the song wasn't officially released by Metropolis until the year 2000 on the album The Power of the Night. Scene in the show Forever Night, Season 1, Episode 1, long before the track was released on the aforementioned La La Land release.
I don't think you want to know.
Additional campaign that showcased Jason slicing through the I Love New York logo, a visual prominently displayed on the initial movie poster. However, this poster was subsequently changed when the New York State Economic Development Committee lodged a complaint against Paramount Pictures due to the unauthorized utilization of the I Love New York logo. Consequently, Paramount released an alternative poster that depicted Jason overshadowing the skyline of New York City. In their own individual ways, both versions of the poster have become fan favorites and has often found itself subjected to heavy criticism from a large portion of the Friday fanbase, particularly for its somewhat misleading title, given the actual spatial narrative of the film. Although the title seems to promise a horror romp through the iconic urban jungle of NYC, a substantial portion of the film unfolds within the confines of a cruise ship. This divergence between expectation and execution has led some fans to express dissatisfaction with the film, despite the film presenting classic elements intrinsic to the franchise. Kane Hodder, revered by many as one of the best actors to don the hockey mask, delivers a compelling performance as the notorious slasher once again, contributing significantly to the eerie and tense atmosphere that permeates both the cruise ship and the NYC segments of the film. A splendidly repulsive and delightful touch. In contrast to the decaying red and brown hues of his skin in The New Blood. Here, the surrounding ensemble, while not as prominently featured here, provides a sturdy support system that enhances the overall atmosphere and tension throughout the film. With that said, Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, is a masterpiece. From filmmaker Adam Marcus comes the 9th installment in the infamous Friday the 13th franchise, releasing for the first time beneath the banner of New Line Cinema rather than Paramount Pictures. This bizarre Jason Voorhees sequel features magical daggers, body-jumping, slime-covered demon Jason slug monsters, a badass bounty hunter named Creighton Duke, excessive amounts of gross-out gore, and the epic return of Kane Hodder as Jason Voorhees. Let's take a look at Adam Marcus's 1993 supernatural slasher movie, the second film in the franchise to suggest being the final entry, Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday. I've said this before and I'll say it again, but it remains mind-blowing to me that this turnaround even exists, especially considering how hard-headed I am regarding movies I simply do not like. I spent the better part of 25 years absolutely hating this movie, ever since the first time I saw it in theaters at the age of 6. Well into my mid to late 20s, I didn't like the acting, the pacing, the story, the score, the characters, the magic stuff, the body jumping, etc., etc., etc. I mean, my list of dislikes was probably 2 stories tall. But at the same time, I rented the movie continuously throughout the 90s, owned the DVD, bought a bootleg Blu-ray from eBay before its official Blu-ray release in the box set, bought the box set, and so on and so forth. The point is, although I hated the movie, at least I thought I did, I always found myself going out of my way to watch it. Then, suddenly in 2017-ish, a switch in my head just flipped, and I was overcome with the realization that I didn't hate Jason Goes to Hell at all, at least anymore. And not only did I not hate it, I loved it, seemingly suddenly, but maybe I always did, and just spent the better part of 3 decades trying to convince myself otherwise. Whatever the reason is, I am fully on board and embrace the absolute nonsense of this movie at this point. Whether this realization is sincere or simply some kind of weird Stockholm syndrome, Jason Goes to Hell is not afraid to be Jason Goes to Hell. Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday, marks a notable departure from the traditional Friday the 13th formula. The film begins with an elaborate setup wherein Jason Voorhees is lured into an ambush by undercover agents, resulting in a massive explosion orchestrated by the FBI, seemingly ending the reign of the infamous Crystal Lake Killer. But the true horror begins when it's revealed that while Jason's body is dead, his evil spirit remains very much alive, and possesses the coroner upon being entranced by Jason's still-beating heart. This sets the stage for a series of body-hopping horrors as Jason's spirit moves from one host to the next, carrying out yet another vengeful rampage on his way back to Crystal Lake from the morgue. The plot thickens when it's revealed through bounty hunter Creighton Duke that Jason has a secret family residing within the Crystal Lake area, and that the only thing that can truly kill the undead Jason Voorhees is another Voorhees. Jason's purpose then becomes twofold: to find a suitable female relative to be reborn through fully, and then to eliminate any and all remaining family members who might threaten him thereafter. Amidst the chaos, Jessica Voorhees learns of her lineage and the cursed magical dagger that can put an end to Jason's evil for good. The climactic finale sees multiple possessions, a series of intense battles, and the eventual confrontation between the Voorhees family members and Jason himself. The story culminates with not only Jason being dragged down into the depths of hell, but also a surprise teaser linking the world of Jason Voorhees with another iconic horror legend, Freddy Krueger, setting the stage for future cinematic crossovers. After acquiring the rights to Jason Voorhees, but not the Friday the 13th title itself, New Line Cinema had every intention of finally pitting their own in-house slasher icon, Freddy Krueger, against the hockey-masked madman. But with the Freddy vs. Jason ideas being thrown around left and right, and the project still years and years away from being fully fleshed out, it became known rather quickly that the way to go with the character of Jason Voorhees was simply to make another Jason movie, without the backing support of his usually Friday the 13th namesake. Sean S. Cunningham returned to the franchise for the first time since the original film, this time solely as a producer. Adam Marcus, a young and upcoming director, was selected by Cunningham to helm the film, with the understanding that Jason's iconic hockey mask should be removed. While Cunningham refutes any claims of telling Marcus to abandon the mask, Marcus counters by saying he wasn't granted that level of creative autonomy. This could probably be chalked up to more a miscommunication snafu than either one of them lying about what happened. Adam Marcus was instructed to pretty much disregard, or at least ignore, the events of Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, and more so pick up sometime after the events of The New Blood. But obviously, no matter which way you look at it, Jason Goes to Hell, regarding any of the preceding films before it, has a number of plot inconsistencies and timeline inconsistencies that prevent it from ever truly feeling like a direct continuation of any of the specific entries, which I'm sure was on purpose in one way or the other. Initially, the film was to feature Elias Voorhees, this time acting as the brother of Jason Voorhees versus being his father, as was the original idea for the ending of Jason Lives. Why they were going to use the same name and turn him into Jason's sibling is beyond me, but it was this character who was going to be responsible for the film's murders, by first retrieving Jason's body from the lake, consuming his heart, and acquiring his mystical powers, and embarking on a killing spree similar to his brothers thereafter. The responsibility of turning Marcus's ideas into a screenplay fell to Jay Hughley. Marcus mentioned that he had intended for the character Stephen Freeman to be Tommy Jarvis from the 4th, 5th, and 6th parts, but due to licensing issues, Tommy couldn't be included. Hughley's screenplay draft was seen as convoluted and confusing. Consequently, Dean Lorey was hired by Cunningham to develop a new script from scratch within a week, emphasizing Jason as the primary character and abandoning the Elias Voorhees brother angle completely. One of Lorey's concepts placed Jason in the midst of a Los Angeles gang conflict, but time constraints rejected this idea. Despite his reservations about Lorey's script, Michael DeLuca from New Line Cinema approved the movie's production. As Lorey transitioned to another task, Leslie Bohem was brought in to refine the script. Later, Louis Abernathy contributed further adjustments to the opening segments of the film. It is worth noting, regarding Elias Voorhees, that he is briefly mentioned within Jason Goes to Hell as the father of Jason Voorhees, securing the name within canon, at least within the canon of The Final Friday, having only ever appeared prior to this film in the novelization of Jason Lives.
Well, that makes me think of a little girl in a pink dress, sticking a hot dog through a donut.
Jason Goes to Hell became Adam Marcus's inaugural feature. Fresh out of film school, Marcus was initially set to direct My Boyfriend's Back for Touchstone Pictures. However, due to his inexperience, Walt Disney Studios opted against employing him for the job. Being an avid fan of the Friday the 13th franchise, Marcus envisioned a storyline where Voorhees meets his end early on, but re-emerges through other characters to sustain his reign of terror. Although similarities between this concept and the film The Hidden exist, Marcus clarifies that he had not watched The Hidden prior to making The Final Friday, and any resemblance is unintentional at best. Marcus aimed for a cliché-driven start to the movie, only to surprise audiences with Jason's early demise at the SWAT team's hands. The film's special effects were managed by Al Magliochetti and the K&B Effects Studio. Magliochetti joined the project after his K&B colleagues informed him about the production of the film. Tony Todd tried out for the part of Creighton Duke, but the role ultimately went to Stephen Williams. Although Adam Marcus and Dean Lorey favored Laurie Holden for the character of Jessica Kimball, Sean Cunningham had the final say and chose Carrie Keegan for the role. The production of the film kicked off on July 20th, 1992 in Los Angeles, California, with filming wrapping on September 4th of the same year, after several reshoots and additionally filmed scenes took place. Harry Manfredini, after being absent for the last two films, returned to the franchise as the composer for Jason Goes to Hell. Although there are cues and certain compositions that I do enjoy, there's an aspect about the music itself in general that just annoys me. I'm not sure what it is exactly, but I have a feeling that it's due to the all-synthesized sound of the music on display here. Typically, Manfredini would utilize real instruments and sometimes even an actual orchestra to fully realize his scores, but in Jason Goes to Hell, the music sounds like every single little thing came out of a late 80s, early 90s synthesizer, which I guess can be charming when done right, but here, it just sounds too much like a keyboard versus an actual orchestra, similar to what Fred Mullen did with Parts 7 and 8, but whereas I dug the score for Part 8, something about the score for The Final Friday sounds too synthetic. Now, I could be wrong about this entirely. Maybe he did have live instruments and an orchestra on the score. I'm not entirely sure because I couldn't find any literature on it, but nonetheless, the score definitely has that early 90s, completely done on a keyboard sound to it. And again, while I like some of the work here, most of it just falls flat for me because of this. Overall, I really enjoy Jason Goes to Hell these days, whether it's because I'm under some kind of weird movie Stockholm Syndrome spell, whether I've always liked the film and just never realized it, or I've simply grown to enjoy the film for what it is. That discussion is best left saved for its own separate video, but nonetheless, I dig Jason Goes to Hell. But on that note, the film is not without its issues. The body jumping is a big problem for me regarding the Jason Voorhees mythos, but I could overlook this aspect if taking the film in isolation, which you pretty much have to do regarding Jason Goes to Hell anyways, since it is more of a one-off than anything else. But on the body jumping note, none of the people who get possessed by Jason's spirit act how Jason acts, and they sometimes even talk. I get that this was due to the actors sort of wanting to do their own thing, but this aspect should have not been up for discussion. If you're being possessed by Jason Voorhees, act like Jason Voorhees acts. I'm also not a huge fan of the magic dagger, or the presence of the Evil Dead Book of the Dead, or the Voorhees extended family itself, as presented in this movie. Just a lot of extra needlessly supernatural convoluted stuff that feels more bloated than anything else. And what's the deal with the erotic shaving? I mean, what? The scene is hilariously weird, and definitely one of the most memorably WTF moments in the series, but I mean, what else can I say about it? With that said, there is a ton of stuff that I do love about the film. The kills are gory, the special effects are pretty great, I like most of the characters, and all of the actors do a pretty damn good job with the material. Creighton Duke is an absolute badass character that we definitely need more of. The lighting and cinematography showcase a very spooky atmosphere, and the final battle of the movie is pretty good, albeit a little clunky here and there. Jason literally being dragged down into hell at the end of this movie is a nice literal punctuation of the film's title as well, and it plays out as good as we could have hoped for from a movie as out there as this one. The final shot of Jason's mask being pulled under the sand by Freddy Krueger is a nice touch and definitely an iconic shot, and I understand the intention, but the fact that the laugh we hear isn't even Robert Englund's voice makes it feel a little lackluster for me. Regarding Jason's look in this movie, I do absolutely love it, and it's one of the few things I've unapologetically enjoyed about the movie since day one, one of the few positives I could say about the movie since first seeing it. He's dirty, filthy, absolutely rotten, somehow flesh-colored again after the rotten fish belly look he had in Part 8. He's bloated, he's gross, he looks melted and mutated like some kind of weird, toxic Avenger madman. And I always chalked up his look to being melted by toxic waste at the end of Jason Takes Manhattan, although Adam Marcus has directly stated that this was not his intention, but you know what, if it works, we'll take it, right? I mean, to me, the toxic waste theory just makes more sense. But I absolutely dig the look of Jason here, especially considering his mask is like melted into his face. I mean, what's not to love about this look? I think it's absolutely iconic in the best way. And Kane Hodder, of course, kicks all kinds of ass in this movie as Jason once again, in the few parts we get to see of him as Jason, of course. Thankfully, though, this was not Jason's final outing after all, because we did get the epic Jason X down the road, as well as Freddy vs. Jason a year after that, plus the reboot a few years after that in 2009. Again, I love this film now, but there's no denying that Jason Goes to Hell is riddled with issues, but a lot of these issues help make the movie an even more bizarre sideshow than it would have been otherwise, and I think the legacy of the film is a lot more solidified now because of those issues, which is both hilarious and fascinating to me. How I went from hating this movie to loving it, the world may never know, but I will tell you this: Jason Goes to Hell is not afraid to be Jason Goes to Hell. With that said, Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday, is worthy of a rewatch. From filmmaker Jim Isaac comes the infamous 10th entry in the beloved but much debated Friday the 13th franchise, featuring a story that seemingly has nothing to do with the previous installments, especially that of Jason Goes to Hell, and seeing our hockey-masked hero, Jason Voorhees, conquering the far reaches of space. Let's take a look at Jason X. When Jason X was released in theaters, I missed the chance to see it on the big screen. Its stint at our local AMC at the time was so brief that it seemed almost like a blink-and-you-miss-it moment. However, a while later, when the film finally hit shelves at Blockbuster, my Uncle Tony and I decided to rent it. To say we were entertained would be an understatement. The movie was a sheer joy to watch, an absolute blast, brimming with delightful absurdity. I've harbored a fondness for it ever since that day, and what's even more surprising was my uncle's reaction to it. Typically not a fan of slasher films, let alone the Friday the 13th franchise, he was utterly captivated by its memorably cheesy, hilarious, and exaggerated moments. To me, this movie is so endearingly over the top that it's virtually impossible not to love, or at least be entertained by.
What the hell?
In Jason X, the infamous killer, Jason Voorhees, is captured and cryogenically frozen at the Crystal Lake Research Facility. Centuries later, in the year 2455, a group of students on a field trip to the now abandoned planet of Earth discover the frozen hockey-masked madman and inadvertently thaw him out aboard their spaceship. Once awakened, Jason Voorhees resumes his murderous spree, adapting to the new futuristic environment and even undergoing a robotic transformation. The crew must then scramble to survive and stop him before reaching their home on a distant space colony. But how can anybody defeat something as mean and unstoppable and relentless as Uber Jason?
Fight! Guys! It's okay, he just wanted his machete back! Whew!
In the late 1990s, well after the release of Jason Goes to Hell, and as the progress on Freddy vs. Jason continued to lag, Jim Isaac and Sean S. Cunningham initiated the development of Jason X to maintain fan engagement with the Friday the 13th franchise until the crossover movie eventually materialized. If and when, that is. Todd Farmer, who also portrays Dallas in Jason X, brainstormed various scenarios for Jason before ultimately proposing a space-themed horror movie, drawing inspiration, of course, from Alien. Production for Jason X took place in Toronto from March to May of 2000, although the film would be shelved until late 2001, where it began releasing in international markets, before finally being released here in the States in April of 2002, a year and some change before the release of Freddy vs. Jason in 2003. Harry Manfredini returned to the franchise yet again to compose the score for Jason X, and, like the music of Jason Goes to Hell, and while I dig certain compositions within said score, the music often just sounds too synthesized and too cheesy, in ways I don't particularly find all that appealing to the ear. I typically like cheesy synthesized music, but for some reason, when it comes to the music of Friday the 13th movies, I think the organic sounds of real instruments is at least what these movies need, hence my slight dissatisfaction with the scores of both Jason X and Jason Goes to Hell. Not terrible music in any way, shape, or form, just not one of my favorite scores of the franchise. Not by far.
His unique ability to regenerate lost and damaged tissue, I mean, it cries out for more research.
And you're willing to risk the deaths of innocent civilians if he escapes?
Yes. But I'm sure Sergeant Marcus and his men can handle the transfer just fine. Sergeant?
Everything's under control, man.
Jason X stars Kane Hodder as Jason Voorhees, becoming Hodder's fourth and final time portraying the iconic horror villain until his eventual return to the character in the 2017 Friday the 13th video game. To this day, he remains the only actor to have played Jason Voorhees more than once, bringing a distinct physicality to the role. The film's final girl, Rowan LaFontaine, is played by Letza Doig, known for her roles in TV shows such as Andromeda and Stargate SG-1. Also appearing in the film is Lisa Ryder as KM-14, an android with enhanced combat abilities who becomes a pivotal plot device in the battle against Uber Jason. Ryder had previously worked with Lexa Doig on Andromeda as well. The film also sees Chuck Campbell as Sunaran, a tech-savvy character closely linked with the android KM-14, as well as badass Peter Mensah as Sergeant Brodsky, the leader of a group of space marines tasked with handling the Jason Voorhees problem. The rest of the supporting cast all do great jobs in their respective roles as well. As with Jason Goes to Hell, the cast of Jason X is commendable regardless of whether you enjoyed the movie itself or not.
Are you paying attention, Azrael?
Yeah.
Well, don't touch anything.
Within Jason X, the utilization of lighting and cinematography aptly fits the narrative context of its space-themed adventure aboard a spaceship. While these technical elements might not be groundbreaking or exceptionally remarkable, they are notably suited to the futuristic ambiance the movie seeks to portray. The sterile lighting and the clean cinematography-related choices echo the pristine and advanced environment of the spacecraft, evoking an intriguing contrast to the impending horror of Jason Voorhees. Despite being set within the luminous and vibrant confines of the spaceship, Jason X, however, does not falter in delivering its mood and atmosphere, which can be described as both intense and tantalizing. The film seamlessly incorporates its menacing horror elements, ensuring that they remain potent and undiluted, even amidst the ship's brilliant and expansive spaces.
Hey, Slappy!
Got a little something for you.
Oh, wow.
Gave her an upload.
Afraid I'm gonna have to hurt you now.
Cam!
Jason X revels in its own campy essence, fully embracing the inherent goofiness and absurdity that defines its narrative. What sets the movie apart is its unabashed acceptance of its own identity, refusing to shy away from its unique blend of humor and horror. Amidst the comical undertones, Kane Hodder's portrayal of both classic Jason and the evolved Uber Jason is a standout, serving as a testament to his acting prowess. His unwavering portrayal of Jason's relentless nature ensures that the character's menacing core remains intact, irrespective of the film's zany comedic moments. This intricate balance of humor and horror makes Jason X an unforgettable installment in the overall franchise, loved by many for its daring originality.
I said pause play.
He's not pausing.
Yeah, no kidding. I think we need to reboot. That does not count as a kill.
Yes, it does. Okay, screw this, game over.
The visual representation of classic Jason in the film leaves much to be desired, especially for ardent fans of the franchise. The distinct design of his hockey mask, complete with a pointed nose, coupled with an unusually abundant head of hair, diverts from the iconic image many have come to associate with the character. However, regarding Jason's appearance, the film does redeem itself with the introduction of Uber Jason, a portrayal that is delightfully cheesy and memorable in its audacity. This larger-than-life rendition encapsulates the essence of the film's campy spirit, making it an instant fan favorite. As Kane Hodder's final curtain call in the iconic role, Jason X serves as a fitting tribute, capturing the essence of his legacy while introducing fresh elements that will undoubtedly remain etched in the annals of the Friday the 13th franchise. The kills on display in this movie are excellent as well. I mean, some of the franchise's most original and innovative kills are on display within Jason X. The cryogenically frozen face being shattered against the counter, the giant screw, the girl being sucked out of the spaceship a la Alien Resurrection, and the return of the infamous sleeping bag kill, among many other creative deaths in the movie. It really gets no better than Jason X.
Where are you, damn it?
I unabashedly love this movie, and for all its quirkiness, I wouldn't change a thing about it, and its rewatchability factor is simply off the charts. With all that said, Jim Isaacs' science fiction horror slasher epic, Jason X, is one hell of a ride. From filmmaker Ronnie Yu comes the terrifying versus match that took the better part of 2 decades to finally materialize after dozens of failed attempts, failed scripts, and snafus with the rights holders. But alas, just 10 years after New Line Cinema acquired the rights to Jason Voorhees, the house that Freddy built was finally ready to unleash the crossover event of the century that saw 2 franchises come together for one splatterfest of gore and violence, Friday the 13th and A Nightmare on Elm Street. Let's take a look at Freddy versus Jason.
my children for far too long.
In the vividly haunting closing scene of Jason Goes to Hell, the landscape of horror cinema shifted dramatically as viewers witnessed, perhaps with bated breath, the iconic hand of Freddy Krueger piercing through the soil to seize Jason's mask, dragging it down into the abyss, a gesture that held the promise of a future face-off that could potentially shake the foundations of the horror genre. This fleeting, yet monumental encounter initiated a decade-long period of fervent speculation and anticipation, fueled by a seemingly unending stream of Fangoria articles dissecting every whisper and rumor surrounding the prospective showdown between the two behemoths of fright, Freddy and Jason. As the millennium turned, whispers grew into more concrete murmurs, echoing in the halls of horror fandom. And finally, as the calendar pages flipped steadily towards the fall of 2002, the moment that seemed almost mythical became grounded in reality. In the warming embrace of September's arrival, the gears of production ground into motion, with cameras capturing the first visuals that signified the clash of titans was no longer a figment of imagination, but a forthcoming spectacle set in celluloid, pulling in audiences with the promise of witnessing the clash of horror's most notorious icons, sealing a chapter of apprehensive wait, while pledging the dawn of an era where nightmares would take form, far beyond the bounds of sleep, in a cinematic duel where fear was the only guaranteed victor.
Babe, you know I don't like to be touched after, okay?
Fine, I'll go have a shower then.
Good. Your hair smells like menthols anyway.
Asshole.
In the late 1980s, spurred by fans' anticipation, New Line Cinema and Paramount Pictures attempted to collaborate on a crossover film featuring Freddy and Jason, but early negotiations spearheaded by Frank Mancuso Jr. and Tom McLaughlin stumbled. Despite the fluctuating fate of the franchise following the underwhelming performance of Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, the project persisted through a labyrinth of development struggles. Over the years, multiple industry personalities like Joseph Zito, Wes Craven, and Sean S. Cunningham engaged with it, with the latter even developing Jason X to retain interest in the series amidst the delays. The project saw numerous scripts and ideas from a variety of screenwriters, including Louis Abernathy with his Nightmare 13, Freddy Meets Jason, and works by notable names like David J. Shaw and Peter Briggs. It underwent several rewrites and director considerations, including a moment where Guillermo del Toro and Peter Jackson were approached without success. Despite challenges, including disagreements over script quality and budget concerns, the early 2000s brought a resurgence of efforts, with writers Mark Swift and Damian Shannon developing a satisfactory script which David S. Goyer helped to refine. The directorial role saw refusals from many, including Wes Craven and Guillermo del Toro, before Ronnie Yu took the helm, accorded considerable creative freedom. The ambitious project, which at one point considered featuring Pinhead from the Hellraiser series, continued evolving until its eventual realization, standing as a testimony to the tumultuous journey of bringing the iconic Freddy vs. Jason battle to the big screen. In 1999, Robert Englund was confirmed for his 8th role as Freddy Krueger in an upcoming film. By August 2002, Kelly Rowland and Brad Renfro had joined the cast, although Renfro was later replaced by Jason Ritter a week before production began. Meanwhile, Kane Hodder's reprisal as Jason Voorhees faced uncertainty as there were plans to, quote, reinvent the character. The lead role went to Monica Keena after a meticulous search, and the supporting cast included Canadian actors such as Catherine Isabelle and Lachlan Monroe. Despite efforts to have Betsy Palmer reprise her role as Pamela Voorhees from the original Friday the 13th, salary disputes led to Paula Shaw taking on the role. Despite having portrayed Jason in the previous 4 films, Kane Hodder was not recast in Freddy vs. Jason, to the dismay of Cunningham, who favored Kane Hodder. New Line producers sought a fresh portrayal of Jason Voorhees, favoring a taller, slower, and more deliberate presence. Consequently, the role was given to Canadian stuntman Ken Kersinger, who had a height advantage over Hodder and previously worked on Jason Takes Manhattan. Kersinger, standing at 6 feet 5 inches, was notably taller than both Hodder and Robert Englund. His height and experience, including doubling for Hodder in Jason Takes Manhattan, played a significant role in securing his casting, which was finalized only after reviewing his on-film appearance in a scene walking down Elm Street. In Freddy vs. Jason, a sinister plan unfolds as Freddy Krueger, now forgotten by the newer generation thanks to their parents supplying them with anti-dreaming pills, orchestrates a fearsome comeback. Unwilling to fade into obscurity, he resurrects the infamous hockey mask-wearing killer, Jason Voorhees, unleashing him upon Elm Street to sow havoc and reignite the citizens' fear of Krueger himself. The horrifying scheme works initially, with people associating the fresh wave of violence with the nightmare-invoking Freddy Krueger, thereby restoring some of his lost power. However, as Jason steals some of Krueger's prospective victims, tensions escalate between the two nightmarish beings, spiraling into a ferocious battle for dominance. Caught in this relentless cycle of violence are a group of Elm Street teenagers who find themselves trying to decipher the true cause behind the sudden surge in brutality, hoping to find a way to banish Krueger from their lives for good. The series of deadly encounters, fueled by a complicated web of jealousy, vengeance, and power struggles, leads to a climactic battle at the infamous grounds of Camp Crystal Lake, promising resolution and hoping to satisfy the desire for survival and peace among the terror-stricken inhabitants of Elm Street. I personally maintain a deep-seated affection for Freddy vs. Jason, a sentiment that has stood the test of time ever since I reveled in its theatrical release, a joy I relived several times over on the big screen. Ken Kersinger, although not as impressive as Hodder, mustered a commendable performance given the narrative dynamics at play. Undoubtedly, a considerable portion of my admiration is reserved for Robert Englund, who reprised his iconic role as Freddy Krueger with a virtuosity that bore testament to his unyielding mastery over the character even after all those years. As for the ensemble cast, there was a notable harmony in their portrayals, which enhanced the overall narrative, allowing for a thoroughly enjoyable viewing experience. While the story did take some liberties, intertwining the established timelines of both franchises somewhat muddily, it succeeded in carving out a distinct narrative space that felt sufficiently robust and well articulated to shepherd the audience swiftly towards the much-anticipated climactic confrontation between the two behemoths of horror. Admittedly, when placed in the broader context of both franchises' legendary portfolios, Freddy vs. Jason might not stake the claim for the pinnacle position. Despite this, however, and even bearing in mind the array of creative choices that I find less than satisfactory, this crossover extravaganza retained a delightful edge that keeps drawing me back in. The movie evokes a blend of nostalgia and exhilaration, a testament to a time when the two titans of terror graced the screens together, offering not just a duel of fates, but a fusion of frights that has a unique charm, one that remains untouched and irresistibly enjoyable, even as time marches on. The film dazzles with a visual palette reminiscent of an MTV music video, boasting a set design that stands as a breathtaking entity in its own right. Accompanying this vibrance is the magnificent original score crafted by Graham Revell, a score that arguably stands as one of the finest in both respective franchises. The contemporary soundtrack further elevates this experience, offering stellar contributions from the likes of Slipknot and Mushroomhead, alongside Il Niño and Chimera, plus a slew of others, melding seamlessly to enhance the rich tapestry of the movie's audiovisual landscape. It's indisputable that Kane Hodder should have been cast as Jason Voorhees. This sentiment rings true for many fans, even to this day. The unmistakable presence that Hodder would have brought to the role would have been unparalleled, offering a depth to the character of Jason Voorhees that would have reverberated powerfully within the franchise's rich history. This casting choice would have also finally realized the highly anticipated face-off between two heavyweights, Robert Englund and Kane Hodder. While there is an acknowledgement that Ken Kersinger's portrayal was competent, it is still widely felt that Hodder was the one who truly deserved to don that infamous hockey mask for a fifth time. Moreover, Hodder's passion and unique understanding of the horror genre would have undoubtedly brought a richer, more nuanced depiction to the character, resonating well with Jason's established personality. Thus, the lingering sentiment remains. A golden opportunity was missed, a moment in horror cinema history that regrettably will remain in the realm of what could have been, forever echoing with the collective sighs of what should have been a phenomenal portrayal of Jason Voorhees by Kane Hodder. Robert Englund may never reprise his role as Freddy again on screen, but this movie wonderfully honors his iconic portrayal. The film aligns with the original franchise's continuity, deviating from the meta version seen in New Nightmare. As always, Englund delivers an outstanding performance. And if this movie truly was his swan song in the role, then that's perfectly fine. Most of my complaints with the film come from a creative place, based on what I personally would or would have not done with the story, but as far as what's on screen in the movie, I find it incredibly hard to want to change anything, because of how much I love everything in it, even some of the cheesier and quirkier moments, some of which have hilariously aged terribly. However, I strongly dislike the mischaracterization of Freddy as a pedophile instead of solely just a child killer, which he's always been in this continuity, never a pedophile. And I find Jason's fear of water to be an illogical choice that is as stupid a choice as they come. I mean, we've only seen the dude willingly embrace water in almost every movie he's been in, but what do the fans know, am I right? Aside from those aspects, I largely enjoy this movie, and if you haven't seen the movie in a while or haven't seen it ever, I implore you to see this movie. It is an absolute blast, and it is as 2003 as 2003 can be. It is as fun as a horror movie could possibly be, and I love every single moment of it. With that said, Ronnie Yu's 2003 horror matchup, Freddy vs. Jason, is, and no, I'm not lying when I say this, a masterpiece. From filmmaker Marcus Nispel comes the 12th installment in the infamous Friday the 13th franchise, including Freddy vs. Jason, and acting as a reboot of the entire Friday the 13th mythos, hoping to kickstart an entirely new line of films that ended up never materializing beyond this movie. Let's take a look at 2009's Friday the 13th. I was never excited about this project. From its initial announcement to the on-set production photos showcasing Jason's long blonde flowing locks of hair, I was just lukewarm at best regarding this reboot. However, I still found myself in theaters on opening night, hoping for the best, but expecting the worst. I came out of the theater pretty numb about what I'd just seen. A hodgepodge of the first 4 films, a lackluster storyline, a film that was visually too dark to see most of the time, and a movie that just, in general, failed to even justify its own existence. To this day, all these years later, the movie hasn't really gotten any better for me, and I honestly think it may in fact be the most boring movie out of the entire franchise.
What the fuck? What is this? No!
In the 2009 reboot of Friday the 13th, a group of young adults travels to the abandoned Camp Crystal Lake in search of a stash of marijuana. They encounter the masked killer, Jason Voorhees, who quickly dispatches most of them. 6 weeks later, another group arrives at a cabin near the camp, encountering a man named Clay Miller on the way, who is searching for his missing sister, Whitney, one of the earlier group's members. As this new group starts to enjoy their vacation, Jason begins hunting them down one by one. Throughout the movie, it's revealed that Whitney is still alive, being kept hostage by the hockey-masked madman because she bears a resemblance to Jason's deceased mother, Pamela Voorhees, which plays into his decisions regarding her fate. The climax sees a final confrontation between Jason, Clay, and Whitney, which ends in lackluster fashion, with Jason expectedly bursting out of the dock and grabbing Whitney. New Line Cinema's Toby Emmerich enlisted Platinum Dunes producers Michael Bay, Brad Fuller, and Andrew Form to remake the Friday the 13th film in the same vein as their reboot of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. After a year of negotiations with Paramount Pictures, New Line Cinema, and Crystal Lake Entertainment, the producers acquired the rights, deciding to rework the film's mythology rather than continue the series or simply retell the origin. Elements from the first 4 films were incorporated, and the audience would see Jason Voorhees transition from a bag-covered face to his iconic hockey mask in the film. The movie, set in the 2000s, was penned by Damian Shannon and Mark Swift, with Marcus Nispel hired as its director. Filming took place mainly in Austin, Texas, in 2008. Derek Mears was cast as Jason, emphasizing the character's backstory and motivations. The cast also included Amanda Righetti and Jared Padalecki. When crafting the script for Friday the 13th, writers Shannon and Swift drew from their previous experience on Freddy vs. Jason to establish specific guidelines. They sought authentic-sounding teenage characters and aimed to avoid cliches such as the characters knowing Jason's name or the film becoming self-referential like Scream. Instead, they focused on presenting Jason as a territorial protector in the woods, living off the land. While they initially incorporated unique death scenes for some characters, budgetary restrictions and creative decisions resulted in changes to these scenarios. They aimed for a balance between innovation and paying tribute to iconic elements from earlier installments, such as the presence of a wheelchair and a sweater in Jason's lair. The character of Jason underwent revisions, with inspirations from figures like John Rambo, yet the producers avoided making him overly sympathetic, emphasizing his role as a relentless killer. For the visual effects, the producers employed Asylum Visual Effects, which worked on 25 shots of the movie. To ensure safety and achieve specific visuals, many scenes, such as Amanda's sleeping bag death and Chelsea's boat accident, were crafted digitally. Asylum also digitally generated weapons and enhanced some of Jason's signature kills, combining practical shots with digital additions for a seamless effect. Effects artist Scott Stoddard crafted Jason's appearance by merging elements from Carl Fullerton's design in Friday the 13th Part 2 and Tom Savini's work in Friday the 13th The Final Chapter. Stoddard aimed to showcase a more human side of the character, incorporating hair loss, skin rashes, and traditional facial deformities. To achieve this, actor Derek Mears wore a full-body makeup from the chest up, including a chest plate with movable fake skin, a hump for scoliosis, and a prosthetic eye for realistic eye movements. The makeup application initially took around 3.5 hours, but was later reduced to slightly over an hour for scenes with a hockey mask and approximately 4 hours for unmasked scenes. Jason's wardrobe included combat boots and a customized t-shirt with holes to display the makeup effects. His iconic jacket combined elements from a hunting and military jacket to create a, quote, giant Frankenstein jacket, reflecting the leaner physique of this iteration of the character. Stoddard drew inspiration from the third and fourth films when designing Jason's hockey mask, creating 6 new versions while maintaining fundamental design elements and aging down the markings on the forehead and cheeks.
Oh God, you scared the shit out of me, bro. Are you looking for this? 'Cause it completes your outfit.
Form and Fuller acknowledged the iconic nature of the music featured in the initial 4 installments of the franchise. In preparation for their 2009 movie, they promptly secured licensing rights to the original music, which had been composed and performed by Harry Manfredini. Their intention was not to use the complete original score, but to have Steve Jablonsky craft a score that evoked the essence of Manfredini's work and set the tone for the 2009 film. Nispel, having previously collaborated with Jablonsky on the remake of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, conveyed his desire for Jablonsky to create a memorable yet subtly nuanced soundtrack, one that would linger in the audience's mind without overpowering the viewing experience. Although Manfredini is my favorite and preferred composer for the franchise as a whole, I do at least think the original score for this movie is better than those of Jason Goes to Hell and Jason X, but still nothing compared to the music heard in Final Chapter, New Beginning, or Jason Lives. Not even close. The 2009 reboot of Friday the 13th leaves much to be desired. It fails to captivate the audience and lacks any compelling justification for its own existence within the franchise. Regrettably, it brings nothing innovative to the table in terms of plot or character development. While the cast puts in commendable performances given their material, the majority of the characters they portray are entirely unlikable, with the possible exceptions of Clay, Whitney, and Jenna. Trent, although occasionally amusing, largely embodies a caricature reminiscent of something straight out of 2007's Transformers, which he is. The film, despite its occasional bursts of action, drags on at a snail's pace, making it a tiresome slog to sit through. While I can't claim to enjoy this movie per se, I'll concede that it does surpass the dismal 2010 remake of A Nightmare on Elm Street. Derek Mears admirably takes on the role of Jason Voorhees, but even his performance can't save the film's troubling visual representation of the iconic hockey-masked madman. I just can't stand the way Jason looks in this movie. The bulbous and oddly shaped hockey mask is particularly bothersome to me. While it's not the worst cinematic experience I've ever had, I'd opt for any other installment in the franchise over this one, as it embodies the epitome of the word average. With that said, Friday the 13th, 2009 is, at best, passably average.